This is an attempt at the USA 1929 to 2000 paper, which is paper free. It's on Monday, June the 10th in the morning. I'm looking at last year's 2012 paper, the development of the USA, and around the edges here some of the great people from this era of time, this outline study. Lyndon B. Johnson in the centre, Malcolm X, JFK, Martin Luther King. In the bottom left hand corner, the president who was impeached and then resigned, threatened with impeachment in 1973-1974, the Republican Richard Nixon, and FDR in the top left hand corner, the New Deal, 1932-33 onwards. So let's begin. You're going to get marks for the quality of written communication on one aspect of this paper, so you've got to make sure that you learn how to spell the key concepts, etc. You've got to make sure that your text is legible, punctuation and grammar are consistently good, that you paragraph, make your meaning clear, present neatly, as neat as you can whilst writing quickly, and use specialist vocab accurately. Revise terms like the New Deal, the Black Panther movement, Black Power movement, Montgomery bus boycott, etc. And make sure that you try and use the right style of writing in your answer. Persuasive text when you're answering how far, making a judgment. How important was education in the fight for civil rights? You need to use persuasion. Or descriptive text if you're describing or outlining the Watergate scandal, for example. There's the instructions for you to read that you're all going to have when you look at the exam paper. Obviously don't write in red or green, use black ink, black ballpoint pen. Answer 2 questions from section A, one on the USA in general and one on Black America, and then one from section B, one of the extended answers on Black America, or how America changed and progressed or regressed from 1929 to 2000. Just give you time to have a look at the information there. Okay, bank this question in 1 minute, don't waste any time. The question is, look at source A. What does it tell you about some women in the USA in the 1940s? Pick 2 relevant pieces of information, such as women helped or contributed towards the war effort, they carried out specialised tasks, they carried out masculine jobs, they were gaining independence, they worked in factories, and they got their hands dirty during the war years, helping the American war effort. 2 marks, get it banked in 1 minute, get it done quickly. Annotate 2 or 3 points around the source to help you if you want. That's a good technique to use. Describe what happened during the Watergate scandal. Here you're looking to use selected knowledge and show an understanding through a description. It's only worth 4 marks, so try and get it done in a couple of minutes. Okay. What you need to do is describe how 5 members of CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, broke into the Democrat headquarters, which was the Watergate building, and how President Nixon, the Republican, tried to cover up, and this led to an investigation by the Senate committee. And the tapes that were handed over showed that there was vital pieces of information missing, and that eventually, when all the tapes were handed over, Richard Nixon was involved in a cover-up in 1973 and 1974. He was threatened with impeachment, which means he would have to resign and step down. He did resign, and he was pardoned by Jimmy Carter, the next US president. But it was a massive scandal where the American people lost confidence in the president, which is the most powerful position in the world. But it was all about 5 members of CREEP breaking into the Watergate building to bug the building to get inside information on their election campaign. It was a big scandal, and that's where we get the term gate from on the end of scandals ever since. Look at the two sources about student protests and answer the following questions. It's really good that you revise about student protests, especially the Ohio Kent State University massacre, and why students were protesting and how young people protested through music, through literature, through cinema, socially and politically protesting. This is about student protests, an intelligent body of young Americans protesting against mainly the Vietnam War. So two sources, one from a textbook. Opinion polls in the late 1950s showed that most young Americans approved of their government and its policies. Source C is a photograph of student protesters in the USA in 1969. It's about bringing home the boys from Vietnam and doing it now rather than risking losing more young American lives. You're aiming to both explain key concepts and use a source. So deploy your own knowledge, key concepts, and recall information, and use a source to help you as well. So use source B and C in your own knowledge to explain why protests by young people had increased in the USA by the end of the 1960s. It's worth 6 marks. Like I say to you all the time, students, you have to use your own knowledge and the sources to gain top marks. It's best if you use the sources to extract information and support this with your own knowledge. Answers will begin to explain why young Americans began to protest in the 1960s. There will be a reference to source B of their approval of governmental policies, but how in the 1950s and 60s a generation gap had appeared and they became more rebellious and prepared to speak up against issues like civil rights and the war at Vietnam, as shown in source C. You could add that by 1970 the Ohio State University massacre, Kent State University massacre, proved that America, the politicians maybe weren't listening to the youth, that the youth had more of a voice now. They had more economic spending power, they had more opportunity to go to university, especially white Americans, and there was more of a rebellious feel in the air. Woodstock 1969, protest movement, protest singers, literature, film, etc. And issues like civil rights and Vietnam were high on the agenda for the youth. They wanted change, and they wanted change now in America. But you've got to use the sources and then intertwine that knowledge with the sources to show there had been a change from B to source C. Answers worth 6 marks will use both the sources and own knowledge to explain the concept of change or improvement. That's key, isn't it? To outline whether there had been an improvement. Answers will focus more sharply on the reasons for youth protests and rebellion. There will be a reference to young Americans approving of the government and its policies in source B, and how many tended to conform to society in contrast to the counterculture which emerged in the 50s and 60s. Many young people in America did still stay loyal to their parents and to government policies and teachers, authority, etc. But many also rebelled, and there was a huge movement from the beatnik movement, the hippie movement, who supported the civil rights campaign, and there was the start of marches and protests on university campuses became prevalent, and how this became a serious problem for the American population, for the American government to deal with. Intelligent young people on university campuses attracting worldwide media attention through their protest campaigns. Now you've got an essay to do, a mini essay, and you'll always get an 8-mark question, so you need a page and a half of writing, and it's got to be structured and paragraphed. You've got to think this out, so annotate around the top of the question, maybe make a small bubble map to tick off your paragraphs and to tick off what you're going to cover. How successful, how important, how far means you've got to make a judgment, and you've got to show whether there was progress or not in American society on the issue, or aspect that you're dealing with in this type of question. How successful was the New Deal in helping the USA recover from the Great Depression of the 1930s? I think we know that the New Deal was successful in helping the USA to ride the tough period of time known as the Great Depression, helping the US civilians and population and government to get through the ordeal of high unemployment and the Wall Street crash and the aftermath. But it stabilised the ship and stabilised society, but it didn't necessarily help the USA to recover long term. It was the war from 1937 onwards, the build up to the Second World War, that really enabled recovery. So if we were to look at this, you'll get 6 marks. Aim for 6 marks or more. You've got to evaluate. That means make a judgment, yes or no, and why, and explain why. Back up your point. But it's got to be a balanced evaluation on how successful the New Deal was. So it says it there, look. There will be an attempt to focus on the successes of the New Deal in terms of stabilising the economy and putting a nation back to work. Reference the achievements of the agencies like the alphabet agencies, such as the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. 3 areas that had a real impact on helping keep unemployment figures down, rightly or wrongly, but also transforming the lives of 7 to 8 million people living in the Tennessee Valley and creating an infrastructure there in a very poor, deprived, impoverished region before the TVA was set up. Or the CCC putting 18 to 25-year-olds into work with low pay, but still helping them to gain employment and skills during a time when they couldn't get any employment. A greater answer will attempt to explain and analyse the successes of the New Deal in restoring confidence and providing a psychological boost to the nation as part of its political, economic and social recovery. Talk about the fireside chats, the first 100 days, the Emergency Banking Act, the closure of the banks and the opening of those banks who were sound and solid and had assets, and how the government rescued many banks, stopping the USA banking collapse, which could have had disastrous repercussions around the world. The fireside chats, connection with the American people, relief, recovery and reform. But counter-argue this was short-term thinking. All of the alphabet agencies were short-term acts to steady America through a difficult time. Was it really about relief, recovery and reform? Many of the alphabet agencies were expensive, and many provided work that wasn't real work really. I was just papering over the cracks, boondoggling. Things such as sweeping leaves in the park or clearing the pigeons in town squares. The PWA being one example of an alphabet agency that might not have been very long term. But there was still billions of investment into America to help the infrastructure and to create jobs and opportunities. But it was the Second World War that ultimately lifted the USA out of the Great Depression long term. I also remember many of the acts of the Great Depression were un-American benefits. The relief aspect of the New Deal, giving unemployment benefit, for example, Federal Emergency Relief Act, for example. Think back to Cinderella Man and the video we watched when he was paying back the money he had borrowed through benefits when times were really, really hard. So yes, the New Deal helped the Americans through such a terrible time and helped the farmers through the Dust Bowl effect of the early 30s. But long term, it was the Second World War that really helped America to recover from the Great Depression.